All right, here we go. Cheers, everybody. My name's Tiffany. I'm the Tipsy artist, and we are going live to teach you how to paint Bless Me Indeed. It is an adorable little farmhouse, and you might notice a few little changes today. So I'm super excited because we are showing two different screens here. So I've done tons of tests behind the scenes, and I hope it works. I pray it works. So we're going to do all this and then we're going to see how it goes. So it looks good on my end. I sure hope it's great on your end. All right. So this is our model. Let me kind of bring that into the light here. And I want to make sure there's no glare. Well, I got to get my phone out of the way. Let's bring it close up. Oh, let me go this way. There we go. All right. So that's basically what we're shooting for. And then you're going to be able to watch me paint down here, which is awesome. Okay. So here's what's awesome. Our kits come with, this is a traceable. So this makes it very fun and easy. And then you also get your beautiful paints here. And then you get a canvas and some brushes and a permanent marker. That's a lot of glare. Let's pull that a little closer. Let me go the right way. Okay, I'm such a noob at this. I'll get it. It's kind of like you have to work in reverse, so I'm not quite used to it all. And then I even give you some fun little word options. So if you're not, into this, I don't know why you wouldn't be, but if you want something else that's different, so like thankful, grateful, welcome, you can try those different options. You just cut it and put it over the transfer paper, and it's super easy to do. Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit. I have my transfer paper down to where the dull gray side faces up. And then I've got the traceable overlay on top, and I've taped it down. That secures it so it doesn't shift in the process. That is very crucial. We do provide some washi tape in the kit, but if you also want to reinforce with the, like Scotch tape, honestly, even better. And then I always encourage you to leave this bottom part loose so that you can lift as you go and check your work. And so that makes it very easy. And hello, everybody. I can see lots of little likes and hearts. That's so awesome. Thank you so much for being here. I am going to check all the comments whenever I'm done and make sure and write back to everybody. But I just want to thank everybody for being here with me. So I'm super excited. All right. So I've worked ahead a little bit so you wouldn't have to just sit here and watch me draw for a really long time. But basically, this is how you do all the setup. And then you can go ahead and lift this off. Ta-da! Okay. And then it's really ready to go. So it makes it very easy. All right. So I'm going to do a few little things. I'm going to leave most of this in a raw state to where it just looks a lot like the graphite transfer that it is initially. But I am going to reinforce my lettering, and here's why. Because I want to be able to just paint all over the surface area and the background, and then I know that this will bleed through, and I don't want to worry about having to do all that very time-consuming cut-in work, because I think that's kind of a drag. And that cuts into the relaxation factor, and we really want to make sure that you are very relaxed with this process. So, and then I'm also going to share with you another tip too. I'm under a little bit more of a time constraint than you are. Working at home, you have the option to absolutely just paint the entire background first. And then you can go ahead and do this whole traceable business on top. That's also very, very easy. You just want to make sure and let all that paint set up and dry completely. And then that way you can do all of this work right on top of all of your background color. And that's really the very easiest way. That way you don't have to do this part twice, because I am going to have to go ahead and do mine twice. So, but either way will work. But I'm going to go ahead and get this in place so that I can see through. And it helps y'all a lot see as I go through the process as well. And then another way too is just to cut a little strip. You change your mind later. Maybe you don't want words first, and then you come back later and go, I do want words. And you can just cut out that little strip and a little piece of transfer paper and place it over the top of all of your background color too. So that's also another option. This is also a nice way to like practice on your penmanship too. So it definitely gives you a guide. And I know that's becoming a really popular thing to do, is practice on the penmanship, since I know that we don't write anymore thanks to our phones. So it's becoming a lost art. And that can be pretty therapeutic as well, just to practice the writing part. All right, so we have a really good foundation. And if you prefer it, you can certainly do all of the work in here too. You can outline everything if you want, if that's what you prefer. A lot of beginners do really like that. They like the fact that it just really brings all the design work out to the front. They never lose all their trace work, and then they can just paint into it. It makes it a lot more like a coloring book painting process. And a lot of beginners really love that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start by working in a lot of our background here. And so you can see, actually, let me show you one more thing here. I'm going to go ahead and take my pencil. So the Traceable definitely got us covered mostly through the whole design work, but I'm losing a little bit of an edge here. So I'm just going to go ahead and take that right off the edge of the canvas. And then here, I'm going to go ahead and take the little bit of trees just right off the edge here too. And then basically this will all just be kind of like pounce work off the edge here. So there's that. And that pretty much firms us up there. And then that line really isn't that, well, I'll just paint over that. Looks like that is on there for sure. Okay, so move this back this way. So I think we're all good here. And then I've just got real simple little plates as a palette. And to get started with this beautiful sky here, I'm going to be using some titanium white and some primary cyan blue. And then also, I love a little bit of this Viridian too. But it's mostly white, so I do have a lot of white. I went ahead and got ready in advance and put a little bit of white to start with. And then let's go ahead and do some Viridian. This is a gorgeous color. So let's go ahead and do about a pea-size amount there. And then also some primary cyan blue. We'll do a little bit more of this too. So I want to keep this sky really light. So those are just really tiny little amounts of that. And then I'm so excited to be working with this down on a flat surface area so that I can add a little bit of water to it, because I actually prefer doing that. And then you don't have to worry about having any water runs. So I absolutely encourage you to experiment with a little bit of that. But again, make sure your canvas is not on an easel. Make sure it is just flat. So I took my mama brush and I actually put it into just a little bit of water nearby. I drag the excess off, and then I'm going to go ahead and pick up a lot of white here, and then just a teeny amount of that Viridian. Just kind of pushing that into the color, and then a little bit of the blue here too. We're going to start really gradual with this mix. There it is, very light. And then let's push in a lot more white to it. Load the brush, kind of push it back and forth. All right, so now I'm going to move this off to the side here. I'm going to go ahead and start to work this in little crisscross strokes here in our sky. And then lots of white as we go. Got a lot of stuff happening here. These lives will just keep getting better and better. We're just learning so much. We went from doing these on the road with starting off with 500 to 1,000 people, and that's a whole different learning curve. And now we're having to go on a computer, and I'm having to learn all kinds of new things. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and push back and forth into this. I'm doing a little cross stroke, so it looks like I'm making the letter X over and over and over again. And then I also want to make sure I add a lot of just white, just back and forth here. And I'll push this into the background. Just back and forth. So this is just a really gorgeous, pretty light sky. And I definitely like a lot of that white to be pushed back and forth in the background because it looks like a little bit of abstracted cloud cover happening back here. And your sky can be pretty light too. Now, as we get near the lettering, you'll notice that I'm just going to go right over the top because it will bleed through. You can start to see that already. So that's what I was talking about earlier when I said we could just go ahead and not have to worry about doing the cut-in work. Now, I will have to reinforce that with black at the very end. That's okay. So I'm coming in near some of this. This will be greenery later, so I'm going to go ahead and use my line edge to go ahead and come in over the top here. Nice straight edge here, so I'll take this all the way across. And then just still working into our blue and our viridian and then our white. And you can see I added a little bit more of the darks in that. Let's kind of work that back and forth and just keep crisscrossing back and forth. Just kind of feather out those brush strokes a little bit too. So, and the more that I hold the brush over to the side, parallel to the canvas, the lighter my hand is. And so it helps me feather out more of those brush strokes as well that way too, by just kind of barely grazing over the top here. So lots of little just feathery light strokes. And our words are peeking through. And the more it dries, the more that will start to bleed through again too, so you won't lose it. But also remember my little tips at the beginning too about how you can always put all the words in at the very end as well. All right, so we've got all this beautiful sky we're doing. And I have to keep a gentle mix here as I go, so just little tiny amounts of each, and then a little bit more of that white. So I just keep that going. Because I do like the variety in my sky. I don't want it to always be just the same uniform color all the way across. So that's why I do more of a gradual mix as I go. Again, lightly feather this out, little cross strokes. And if you feel like you're running into some issues with more transparency, then of course you want to concentrate more on thinking about that hand going more over to the side, parallel to the canvas. That really does help. It helps a lot more of that paint just rest right on the surface area. Now I've got to do a little bit of that cut-in work, so I am changing how I hold the brush. Something you want to be sure of, if you have to do tight lines, cut-in work, you want to go ahead and do some firm pressure. Let's give a visual on this. Firm pressure as you load up your brush, but that will help press the edge. Let me push that into a nice thin line edge. So it helps you be a little bit more precise there. And then we'll go ahead and extend this back out to the background. Nice line all the way down on the side of the silo. And we'll just lightly pull this out. It's getting a little bit dark, but I want to make sure I have lots of white. Okay. Now, another option you can do too that's really popular if you do want to make more of a light gray sky. I do see a lot of people doing that as well. It's really popular with a neutral color scheme. And so you can always add just a teeny tiny amount of black into your mix here too. So you just want to be very, very tiny with that though. See how super tiny that is? And it brings in some of those grays into the mix. Utes it. So you get, with this color mix, you get more of like a sage and a slate. And that's a really pretty color mix too. And I'll have a little bit of that over here to the side. Nice line edge here. So I'm getting all of my color blocking in. All my surface area is nice and covered. And then I'm going to go ahead and just crisscross back and forth. All right, this is looking so good. I'm super excited. Okay, so now what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do all of our baseline. And we have a lot more of the greens that are going to come through here. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this plate all loaded up. We'll work back into that. And a little bit of a caution with your brush. If you know you're going to be a minute, acrylic paint can set up and dry in as little as 5 minutes. So it can harden your brushes into sticks. So you do want to be careful with this. So if you know you don't have a chance to get to your brushes in just a minute, go ahead and wash them out and then let them rest off to the side, or at the very least, at least leave them in some water until you get a chance to get to them. But then you don't want to leave them in water too long either, because then they can bend and become misshapen. So just love your brushes. Be careful. All right, so we've got that off to the side here. And then let's go ahead and look at some more colors. So we've got a really pretty bright yellow green that we'll add. So I'll put this nearby. And then I think I'm going to use some cadmium green as well. So here's our cadmium green. And I'm just pushing out like little pea-sized amounts there. And let's go ahead and do a little mixing. Okay, so I'm going to grab a little bit of the cadmium and that bright yellow green and a little bit of the white. Let's mix those two together. And then I definitely want to have a little bit more of a sage effect on this. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab a super tiny amount of black. So you don't really want to necessarily pick up black, but you just want to barely touch into it. So tiny touch, and that might even be too much, honestly. So I'm going to wipe a little bit of that off. Just very little. So as I push that through, this gives me a little bit more of a cool look to it, a bit more of a sage look. So I'm loving that. Very pretty. And then I'll keep my little blues going too, but I'm going to push those in as I go. So now I'm going to go ahead and do this line work all the way across here. I want those grays at the very top. Now my paint's nice and wet at this point. It's that very first coat. And so you can add a little bit more of the black at this stage. Again, super, super tiny. See how tiny that is? So you get a little bit closer there. Okay, I'm learning here. There, how's that? Okay. All right, so the paint's still wet. And as I push in, see the other green paint was still wet too. So I'm getting a nice soft fade between that green and the black. And so it mutes it, and it creates a nice soft blend in there, but also a little bit more of a darker shade right up towards the top. And then I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more white here and push that in. And just start to go all the way across here. I'll take it all the way across until I basically just run off the canvas. I may have to, let's go up a little bit. All right. I don't want to get too far away because I want y'all to see the work here. But we're going to do a horizontal stroke on this and go back and forth with the greens and the whites. And just nice fluid strokes that go all the way across. And I literally go from one side to the next because I don't want it to get too choppy with the brush strokes. And again, we've got our bright yellow green and our cadmium green, a little bit of our white, and then a little bit of our black there. And we'll push this all the way across. It's looking good. Now, if you run into a little bit of peekaboo white of the canvas and some transparency that you're struggling with, another little hint is to just barely pick up a tiny amount of water, not too much, but then you can run that through as well, and that will help make your paint more fluid as it goes over the top here. And now I'm going to play with just a little bit of color mix as I come in through here. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up just like pure Viridian here, and I'm going to run that through. And see how pretty that is, because you get just nice little streaks that come through there. Now some of that primary cyan blue, we're going to run that through. And you get that really nice transition between the greens that are already there. It's just really nice. You don't even have to work at that transition because the paint's already wet. And so as you place it over the top and just run it across, and it just softly blends into it. Now, what can start to occur is as the paint sets up and dries a little bit, then you might get a little bit of a dry brush over the top. And if that starts to happen, you can always come back in with your lighter shades again, reload a little bit, bright yellow green, cadmium green, a little bit of that white, reload with those lighter shades, push those back through, which is basically re-wetting the surface area of the canvas. And then you can come back in with those darker shades if you want to continue to create that look, and just push those right over the top. All right, so we have some beautiful groundwork there. You can also put in little highlights of white, just pure white too. So let's play with some of that. Okay, this is looking really good. All right, so next up, let's see, we want to go ahead and start to work on, let's do some grays, because we have some grays in our silo and then also our barn. We'll also bring in some of that slate blue too, which would be really pretty. All right, so gray is a really easy mix. So I've got a lot of white here nearby and then my black. Let's go ahead and pick up some white. Tiny amount of the black. Let's mix those two together. All right, so we have a really pretty charcoal color. And we're going to go ahead and work this into the top of our barn. So I'm going to use the line edge of my brush to go ahead and get right next to that line. So, and here's what's wonderful about an old barn is that they do not have perfect lines. The weather has been hard on them, and so you don't have to worry about being too precise. So if you go off a little bit and it's a little bit misshapen, I think that actually makes it look a little bit more realistic. So we're going to go ahead and work in this darker charcoal here. You can add a little bit more of the black, especially making this perspective line here. I'm going to come in with a little bit more black and make sure my edge, let me get closer there, is nice and thin. So I did have some, let's go that way. Yeah, so you can see how thin it is. So I can work in that perspective line. Really helps to have a nice thin line there. And then here. All right, and then we will, when in Rome, let's go ahead and, we can reinforce these too, but I'm going to go ahead and work these in. And this one here. All right, now we want to go back to that charcoal gray that we were mixing. And I'm just taking the brush just back and forth, kind of swiping that line edge back and forth. I think that kind of helps simulate the look of the old rooftop. And now we have to change directions. The direction of the barn's coming this way, so I'm going to change my brush stroke now. So I'm going to go ahead and, instead of going side to side, I'm going to go ahead and just bring it down. So you see a different motion here. And the other thing I will do is gradually, we have all that lovely blue nearby, so I'll touch into some of that and add that into that stroke. So it brings in a little bit of that different color in there, which is nice. So we'll get right next to that line edge. And I'm going to lighten this up just a little bit. So I grabbed a little bit more white because I want to maintain that perspective. I don't want to lose that line edge that goes all the way across here. So I'm coming in with a little bit more white and then a little bit more of that blue that we have nearby. And I'll go ahead and just pull this down. So it's just a nice playful mix of the two. And you can be a little bit rough around these little edges with the tree because that's going to be a pounce effect that'll come in later over the top. So it doesn't require it to be just too precise. So you can get close. And I'm going to grab a little bit more, just a tiny amount of black. And just kind of drag that through. So I'll start here at the top and just kind of lightly drag that through and kind of pull it down. And you can see how I start here and then I kind of angle it as I drag it, so that it echoes that downward shape. Now I'm seeing a little bit of peekaboo transparency there, so I'm going to add just a tiny amount of water. Dip into my water here, and then I'm going to start and do the same stroke, but just pull a little bit of water through there, just so I can make sure and get really good coverage in that surface area. So that water will just flow right into those little spots. And then it's also kind of blending all the colors, and I didn't want it to completely blend. It's okay. I'm going to actually add more layers, but I did need to get that white covered. So I like the fact that it's now covered up, but I do want to come back in with a little bit more of a variety over the surface. So I'm going to go back to a little bit more of a drier brush. So I've got either paper towels nearby or a rag. I'm going to go ahead and do a quick little wipe here. And then let's go ahead and go back into a little bit more of that really pretty blue that we had nearby. Kind of lightly drag that over the top. Just kind of trying to make it look really old. Now let's reinforce that line right there one more time. So I took my brush, I'm going to dip into that hard black again. And then let's go ahead and reinforce this line here too. And then a little bit of white will soften that up a little bit. And then you can also, with a nice firm end line, dip into a little bit more of the lighter white. And you can also take just little tiny dash lines all the way down like this too. Now this is a little bit of white in that same little downward stroke, so it definitely gives that look of it being very weathered here. All right, looking good. Okay, so now I want to really lighten up into this next section here, so it needs to be a lot more white. This has been very dark in here. So I'm going to do a quick little wipe again, or you could actually just completely wet the brush, start over again. I'm going to come back into a lot more of just the pure white, but I still have a little bit of that residual gray on there. And then I'm going to go ahead and push into this space. Again, I want to go back to that really light heather gray color. And I'm also switching the stroke up a little bit, so I'm going into more of like a vertical stroke in here. And I'm getting close to this little sketch here of the tree that will come in. Again, that comes in with a pretty loose little pounce effect, so we can just get close to it and not have to worry about being too perfect in there. And again, this is I call this my mama brush in the kit. And she is a 1/2 inch Taklon, golden Taklon. So this is a Royal and Lang nickel brush. I really love this. It is very firm, holds up very well. It's a really good quality brush. Go back to a little bit more of that gray. And then let's drag a little bit of that gray down here in a vertical stroke too. All right, so we want to go ahead and we're going to mix up some light creams too that we'll push into the mix here. And I'm going to go ahead and get a clean mixing plate. And then we will use, let's see, I want some, trying to find one that's not so, aha. left. I had a almost into it. So this is some primary yellow. We're going to start with this as a base. All right, so this guy is brand new. Yes, I found a good one. All right, so let's go ahead and do a little pea-size amount there. And then we want to go ahead and work back in with some more white. I keep large amounts of white nearby. Okay, this is my other standby white, but it's a little bit, I think I left the cap off. So I keep nails nearby and I have to open that back up again. Okay. All right, that should get me hopefully through. Get more if I need it. All right, so we have lots of white now. And then I also want to touch into a little bit of that black that we had earlier. So I just barely touch into that. I don't need that much. So I'm using that light gray and then a little bit of that primary yellow. All right, so this is still a little too yellow. I need a lot more white because I basically want to take it to where it almost becomes like a very light taupe. So the more white I add, it's starting to get me there. All right, so this is what I want. So you can see I just barely had to use really any of that primary yellow and then a lot of white and then just a tiny amount of black. So, and it really took a lot of white. So that's going to be my next color in there. And then I've added something a little bit different. So this is going to be some paisley, and I definitely want it to bleed through, and I should have done this earlier, but that's okay. We're at a good spot. So I'm going to go ahead and take my permanent marker, and I'm going to go ahead and reinforce this pattern work in here. So, and again, this is definitely something to where if you just wanted to go ahead and paint all of this front of the barn and then use your traceable over the top at the end, you can do that too. But this also works really well, and it helps you map it all in relationship to the rest of the design without having to rethink like where it goes exactly. So honestly, I still feel like this is probably the easiest way, is to just go ahead and use that permanent marker to your advantage. Let it do its beautiful bleed through like it does. And it just provides that reference, because I feel like little paisley shapes can be a little bit challenging for a lot of beginners. So this way it maintains it all. And it just allows you to have a lot more fun with the process. You don't have to worry too much about the mechanics of drawing. You can just relax with the painting process. And these are just fun little leaves. And then we'll do a little bit more here. These are just a few more of the little paisleys. So it has, to me, a paisley, it's been around a long time, but definitely has made little comebacks here and there. We see it a lot. There's definitely the influence with the boho look. I would say that's where I have seen it mainly. So I'm borrowing it and integrating it into the farmhouse look. Because it actually used to be very, very preppy. And that was back a long time ago. Gosh, trying to think. 1995 was a great year for paisley. And the use of burgundy and hunter green. And gosh, what else did we used to mix? Country blue and mauve and ducks. Lots of ducks. So many ducks. Ducks were everywhere. I even had a belt with a duck on it. It was crazy. It's really not right. Okay. So that will maintain that. And then, because what I want to do is I want to add all this beautiful, really light kind of cream color that we have and a lot more of that white. And I want to have this beautiful wash just right over the front and see how it just bleeds right through. So that is what I want. I love that. So I'm going to go ahead. This is my Mama brush, and I'm just placing this right over the top here. Okay, and then just more of the same. This is just a really pretty wash right over the surface area. And you can definitely see how working all that in, that will definitely make your life so much easier. Because you don't want to have to worry about all of that really tedious cut-in work. That's no fun. And this is fun. All right, so nice wash over the surface area there. And then I also want to bring in this lovely shade. You can do a little bit more. We're going to just, that is actually bleeding through very well also. I wasn't sure if that would do it or not. I didn't want to take a chance. So it looks like it probably would have. So that's good to know. I think I hear my puppy dog in the background. I'm going to go ahead and just do a nice wash over all this in here. And then we're going to add a little bit more on this side as well. Yeah, there's my puppy dog coming down the stairs. I am right by the doggy door, so this is usually where she has to make a pit stop. All right, and all this is going to be greenery over here. And then I want to add little touches of blue in here. So I'm going to go back to my other plate where I had some of that sky blue nearby. And I'm going to just barely touch into that. And then I'm going to go ahead and then work this into this shape here. So I'm just going to pull down a little bit. I want to change that color up a little bit. All right, and let's see here. Make that dark gray, and we also need to work on our silo here in a minute as well. So let's go ahead and go back to the dark gray a little bit. Still using that very versatile Mama brush. I'm adding a little bit more black with our white, that darker gray, and I'm going to go ahead and then work in a little bit of that darker gray in this section here. So a little line here. Just fill that in. And then I'll continue coming in with that darker charcoal gray. Check your edge, make sure it's nice and thin on the brush so it doesn't give you a big fat line. So sometimes that belly of the brush can get filled up with paint and it makes it kind of challenging to use. Another thin line here. Make sure y'all can see that okay. Thin line here and here. Been able to use my mama brush a lot, and I may have to switch over some of the smaller brushes here a little bit too. Definitely will on the paisley for sure. All right, so this line is looking good, very filled, but it's a little too clean. I need it to be a little bit more rustic, so I'm going to go ahead and touch into the white again and just kind of lightly drag that across. A little bit of a soft blend into that gray. Really pretty. All right, and now I need to go ahead and reinforce this line again. And this one again. We had a little bit of overpaint there. So I'm pushing back in with my brush. Still got a little bit of that cream, which is nice, and that's mixing in with that charcoal gray. So I'm just reinforcing those lines. Nice horizontal line again, right over the top. All right, and then more of this on the silo. So we have our line here. And then we have another big long line here. Grab this again. So sorry, I did not mean to hit the mic. That probably created a nice big scratching noise, and I apologize. Okay, so a little bit of a curve there. And then we are definitely getting to that need for a smaller brush here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and take Mama. Let's put her off into the water for right now. And we're going to switch over to our little buddy brush. This is a 1/4 inch golden tack line. And sometimes these change in the way they look. Sometimes you'll see me pick one of these. Same thing. I call this my little buddy. It's basically just, little buddy is just my 1/4 inch flat there. So I'm going to go ahead and get more of that lovely gray color, a little bit of white, a little bit of that black. And then these little curves, they go almost all the way across, but there is a little bit of a curve to it, a little upward curve. So I kind of go up like a little bit of a hill, see? And then you also want to grab, sometimes I grab a little bit of that blue nearby. And I'll push that in too. That'll just create a nice little slate. And then go back into the white. So I keep a nice mix going. Kind of have to transition this curve. Kind of flatten that out a little bit. But then as I get into this section, I want to go ahead and start to make little lines that go in that stroke if there's a little bit of a curve to it. So I'm going back and forth between the white and a little bit of black to make that gray. And then I grab a little bit of that blue too. And the blue is still just that primary cyan blue that we had on our plate in the very beginning. And a little bit of dry brush happening here. So you can add a little bit of water to the mix here. Kind of waters it down a little bit, makes that paint more fluid. Easier to move across the canvas. Now, as we're doing this, you're going to notice I'm having a little bit of overlap on those side lines of the silo, the outer lines. And I'm going to reinforce those so that it kind of brings it all into that shape. So I'm not too concerned at this point with that little bit of overlap that goes a little bit over the edge. I will definitely tighten that up here whenever I get done. And just back and forth. But you can see how that pattern is definitely forming. I'll go ahead and come back in with a little bit more white here at the base. And you can also work back in with a little bit of that charcoal too if you're concerned about it all looking too much the same color. You want to create a little bit of it. See how there's a little bit more of a shadow happening there now? So mix it up a little bit. So again, my white. And then little touches of blue. I might even pull in a little bit of that turquoise in there just for fun, just a little bit. It's almost as if it's just getting a little bit of that reflective light from the sky on the metal. It's looking good. Now I'm going to come in with little bits more of white. Kind of softly feather it out a little bit. All right, so that gave me a nice soft blend, but then I definitely need to kind of tighten up the outer edges there. So I'm going to come back in with a little bit more of that black. Nice firm pressure on the end. Kind of check your end there, make sure it's nice and thin. And then I want to go ahead and kind of tidy this up. So I'll bring that line down. And I'll bring this all the way down to the base. This is just that dark charcoal color. A little bit of black into that white. It's actually easier to do this with a longer line brush. So if you want, you can actually, using your mama brush would actually be a little bit easier on this for that one really long line. And I want to go ahead and add just a tiny amount of water to a clean brush. I'm going to go ahead and soften that line there. All right, and now we're going to work on that little top. So I've got my little bit brush nearby. So here is a little bit, it's just a little liner brush. And it's the same colors here. Everything we've been using, a little bit of white, a little bit of the black. But I want to make sure I have a nice fine point. So I'm going to take that same brush. Let me add a little bit of water here too. So a little bit of water. And then let's go ahead and I'm going to twist it between my fingertips so that will load up the brush, but it will also rotate it into a nice fine point. And I'm going to go ahead and bring this over the top here. Nice rounded edge. And then a little bit of black here too. So I make those little tiny curved lines that come all the way down there. And then I also want to work in that white now and soften it up a little bit. So I'm going to pull in a little bit of that cream that we had on our other plate and a little bit of that white. And now I'm going to work into this shape. Let's go and just pull it all the way down. So start at the top and then just pull it down. So I'm kind of overlapping. Kind of looks weird, like it's kind of a hairy top. I'll fix that. I just want to get the basic shape down. All right, now I'm going to grab a little bit more of that black, and then let's just reinforce that shape a little bit, just that little bit of those few lines. And now I'm going to reinforce this line that we lost just now. All right, so we're looking good on our silo there. And then we want to work in some of the details of the building here in front. So let's see, I need to go ahead and do some of these windows. So I have my little bit brush, and I'm going to go ahead and work in these really tiny little details. And again, this is definitely an area where you don't have to worry too much about too much perfection. I will say you want to add a little tiny amount of water to your brush and kind of spin it out, kind of do that little rotation we talked about. That gives you a nice little fine point. But these are old windows, so it's just a nice little loose abstracted reference to this here. And this is just our black and white. I have a little bit of that cream nearby too. I can hear that it's 5 o'clock. Is that right? Can't see that up there. Oh, 5:24. I don't know if y'all can hear that in the mic or not. It's the sound of ice in the fridge making a drink in the background. I'm not sure what time it is where you're at, but it's 5 o'clock here. Making little crisscrosses there for the windows. And you do have to add, again, a little touch of water to help make that paint very, see, it's a little bit more liquidy and it will be a little bit more fluid. And this will help you get into those little tiny areas and make more of a precise line right up next to the edge. Okay. And let's see here. I have more of these over here on this side. I definitely have some water in my brush. I'll make sure I'm out of the way here. So that it makes it very fluid, easy to apply on the canvas. Just real simple in there. Now I'm going to add a little bit of a highlight over here. A little bit more yellow, more white. Kind of spinning that back out as I reload it. I'm going to go ahead and work in a little bit of a highlight here. Little highlights there. Just little soft touches with the brush. Kind of softly blend over the top. Okay, and then we have like little touches of this buffalo plaid, like a little hint of it. Hello! Welcome, everybody. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and add my little bits of, let's start with some black, just pure black here. All right, so I'm going to do a little bit of black here. And then do this little square here. And of course, our Traceable provides this for you, but also if you want to be inventive, you can use, this is a coffee stir, and you can use this to do a little tiny, like buffalo plaid with whatever you're working on. So that's kind of a fun little trick. Because I kind of threw this in here at the last minute. And then I'm going to alternate my black with that really light gray here nearby. Not really light, actually, but some charcoal. And then let's go ahead and push that in nearby. And then I want some sage green next. So I'm going to pick up some of that cadmium green with that gray. We're going to mix gray and cadmium green. So it's going to make a really pretty, like a sage color. And I'm going to have that as my next color combination in here. And I'll come back in and tidy up that black here in a second. All right, let's come back in again with the black. And more of that cadmium green, which will flow into, we're going to have a lot of this. Again, this is just going to be pounced over the top there. I rinse out. I'm going to grab a little bit more of my gray. Let's see, there it is, more gray here. Right there in those little sections. And then I want a really subdued, we're going to pull in a little bit more of that cream color. So let's go back to our other plate, because I don't want it to be just pure white. So I'm definitely going to take some of this really pretty cream. So again, that was your yellow and your white and then your black. And then we're going to go ahead and mix this. We're going to place that down. And we're going to put this over the top there. All right. So this is just kind of a little bit of random buffalo pattern in here. Buffalo plaid. And I keep it kind of, you know, loose and definitely not too perfect. Because again, it's as if it has been on the side of this barn for a while. And so it's not too perfect. Do a little bit of a shadow here. And then I'll pounce back over the top of this. So I'm not going to worry too much more of this, because we'll be pouncing back over the top of that here in a second. So I'm just doing enough to kind of extend into the background, and then we're going to cover up over it. All right, so let's go ahead and do some fun pouncing now. This is a really fun, easy technique. And I'm going to start with my little buddy brush here. And I want to make sure I've got enough paint nearby. So I'm definitely going to be probably borrowing all of this. Little lovely highlights in here. But I want to grab a little bit more of my cadmium green. And I think that might be it because I have lots of black, lots of white, lots of that cadmium green. And then let's do a little bit more of this white. And I definitely want to pull it to more of a sage color, so I'm going to add a little more of that black. Let's get that going. So I don't want it to be too bright. All right, so there is my little buddy, and I've got lots of that loaded up. So I'm going to push this off the side so it doesn't get in the way of the canvas. And then here's a pounce. So I've got lots of paint here on the brush, and then I'm going to start to do this little tapping effect on the side. And so this will just tap right over the surface. So this gives you some really nice texture. Then I also like to come in with some pure white as I go too. Kind of work that in. And see, I had that little hint of that buffalo plaid kind of peeking through, but I'm actually just going to pounce right over the top there and just leave a little bit of it still exposed. But it's in the background now. And then lots of pouncing. And you might even start to designate certain, if you do happen to have certain brushes that become ruined because you left them in the water too long or whatever, those are perfect brushes for this whole pounce effect because you can see how it kind of does start to tear it up a little bit, that motion. I mean, I can get this to clean up again for another use, but if you start to really love this look of pouncing, which a lot of people do, and you keep repeating this over and over again, you're going to find that you will definitely want to go ahead and designate certain brushes just for this. Now, I just picked up a little bit of the Viridian, which is really bright, but you can see how that taps in and creates some really pretty little shadows in there. So I really like that. I'm going to add a little bit of that so it creates some depth, but not necessarily black or that goes too dark. We'll just keep working this all the way through here. And I also like to pick up a lot of white as I go too. Kind of lighten it back up a little bit. A little bit of black sometimes too can be nice. It adds a nice little shadow. You know what? And let's do some pure green. Let's just throw that in there. Really bright there. So this is a real simple move and not a fancy brush to do it in at all. I mean, this, again, very easy with very simple tools. But I do definitely prefer the Taklon because it is stiff, and so it will definitely hold up and maintain a nice shape while you're doing this. Get my plate out of the way. And now let's go dark again. We want our sage again, so I'm going to add a little bit more of my black and my white. So I'm trying to stay muted, so I want to definitely keep it in that world. So I'm a little bit more subtle with the bright greens, just a little bit. But I want to keep it more muted because that's what I'm trying to achieve here with this particular look. Let's take this all the way to the end here. Lots of white. Bring that in over the surface. And just lots of hitting it right on the side. This is a great move for getting rid of stress. You can just, I think Bob Ross said you could beat the devil out of it. He was a genius. Just tap, tap, tap. All right, so I'm getting some darker shades in here. So I had a little bit of that black, cadmium green, and the white. A bit more black. We're going to add a little bit more shadow here, a little bit more black there. It's kind of peeking through. A little bit of a rounded look here. And see, this is looking a little too uniform up in here, so I'm going to go ahead and kind of pounce that out, diffuse that a little bit. So sometimes you have to watch your patterns. If you get a little bit too much in one area, kind of diffuse it. More white. And I also want to make sure I've got just a hint of gold happening here too. So I'm going to go back to this bright yellow. And that kind of tapped in there too can bring in some nice little highlights. And the paint's all wet, so it just really softly blends in there. So just little tiny amounts of that primary yellow. So that's looking really sweet. Okay. And then, you can leave that just the way it is, add more. You can also add a little bit more over here. I'm going to go ahead. In my original, I didn't have anything over here, but I think I want to add this time. I want to go ahead and just add a little bit more here. I'm not sure why I didn't. There's lots of reasons. Maybe my husband said, dinner's ready. And I said, see ya. I went ahead and went and ate and left this poor little area bare without any greenery. I almost said food, but no. So I really think I like a little bit more greenery over here. I think it looks better, a lot better. So I'm improving this second one. See what I'm doing in my poor brush? It's sad, but it's awesome, but it's sad. So again, you might want to have a brush that you can just really tear up because, man, that's looking kind of, yeah, I'm pretty much destroying this one. All right. I like it. And why not have a little bit of greenery everywhere? I don't know why my poor yard. Boy, I don't know what I did on this first one. I was like, gosh, I didn't have much happening. I'm going to do a little bit more. What you want to avoid is not having anything too dark behind it peek through so that it looks like you've got this transparency of a shrub in front, because that looks a little unnatural. So I'm going to add a little bit more black in here as I do this. Kind of get that shadow happening here. Yeah, we're having a We're going to create a better yard this time. More growth, more thriving. My first painting was in 2020, and this painting is for 2021. We can all thrive more. Amen. All right. Yes, I have tortured this poor brush. It is sad. Okay. Let's get that little bit of shadow in there. See, I just touched into a little bit more of that black. I just kind of spotted that in there, a little bit more of that pounce of the black right over the top there. I'm so sorry I keep hitting that mic. Probably what I need is a headset. I'm working on that. All of this new technology stuff, I'm going to get it down. I've made great strides by having, this is my first day to have the split screen where I can actually see what I'm working on. So that's kind of a little miracle in itself, because I've been doing but 150 paintings so far I have done without really seeing my painting. So it's completely off to the side, and I have all this light that comes at me. And so I've been having to work where I don't really quite see the whole work of art as I'm doing it. And so that's, it's a little bit challenging. Okay, my poor brush, I kind of got it back to normal, but it's definitely a little frayed. All right, so now I am going to get back to my sweet little bit brush here. And we're going to start to work in this beautiful coloring here over the front with our paisley design. All right, so let's see. And I'm sorry again for hitting the mic. I keep hitting the mic. I'm so sorry. It's probably like a big ouch. I'm going to have to go back and listen to this and see what it sounds like. Okay, so I've got my sage green, and I'm going to add a little bit of water to this because I definitely want it to be very fluid and easy to work into this shape back here. All right, so I've got this first wonderful little curve. It's kind of like a nice teardrop. And it comes up to another little curve. And then, you know what, let's add a little bit of white in here too. Get that little soft transition between the two. And then now we're going to get into this one. It's pretty dark. Let's lighten that up a little bit. I definitely want a sage, but it's pretty dark, so I'm going to let's lighten this up. That's better. I don't want it to be so severe. It was almost looking a little army green. All right, so we're going to go into this little shape. Again, this is a beautiful paisley. I want it to be just a little bit darker right on the edge. Let's do a little bit of this blue for fun. All right, amazing. Again, just filling into that paisley. Okay, that's looking really good. All right, now I want to do a little bit of the leaf work around the edges. So we're going to continue on with this, but I want to brighten this up. So I have that yellow off to the side. For here, I'm going to add this in. It's going to brighten up that sage. So I added primary yellow to that. Got a little bit of white. Now let's get a nice soft twist. Let's go ahead and so it's like making little tiny loops and then coming back to the center. All right, so again, a little loop and then back to the center. And a loop and back to the center. Same thing, basically just lots of little loops. And I'm using my pinky to kind of help brace my hand while I do these more precise little curves in here. And that's a really good thing to do. You can kind of see how it's just stabilizing my hand. I'm resting the weight there. Just make sure you don't put it into wet paint nearby. Just kind of be careful about placement. All right, so this is looking sweet. So now we need to start working in with our charcoal color. And so I'm going to clean off that brush. It's all clean. And now let's go ahead and I'm going to touch into some white, into some black. With that charcoal now. Also want a little bit of blue nearby. So here's a little bit more water. Let's get a little bit of that primary cyan blue. See how that's turning into a really pretty slate. Now I need a little bit of white. It's a little too blue, so I want just a hint, but I still want it to be more of a reed of gray with a hint of blue. So that's getting closer. That's getting there. All right, so I've got my brush loaded up and I'm going to twist it into a nice fine point. And then I'm going to go ahead and have this curve around. I just grabbed a little bit of white to mix in with it too. That gives it a nice soft blend. So I'm going back and forth between my slate that I mixed up and then a little bit of that white too. All right, very nice. And we're going to repeat that same basic technique around all of these shapes. So again, it feels a lot like making just a big raindrop or like a big loop shape. Starting very small at the top sides, a little bit more fullness around the bottom. And then as it comes back up, then you just kind of lift off with a light hand because you get that taper at the top. And let's do a little bit more white. I'm going to do a little bit more white here too. I'm liking the transition, a little bit more of a highlight on one side. Okay, that's looking really pretty. And then I need to reinforce the little paisley design that comes around the edges. So I'm back to a clean brush. And then we need to darken up a little bit because this line work needs to be a much darker charcoal. So I'm going to grab a little bit more of that black. I'm going to add a little bit more water to that because as I'm doing really small, precise moves, you can see how that water makes it to where it's going to be much more fluid. So that really helps it spread on the canvas, and it really helps it go into those little tiny areas. So I can make really tiny little moves like this. And I've got that little cream that's showing through. So I'm just working on my little loops right now, and then I'm going to come back in with this line that will really help it feel connected to the shape. We'll do that whenever we get finished up. And then I'm going to go ahead and connect this. All right, so same thing. Just lots of little hills. And again, to get that tiny little twist, make sure and rotate the end of the brush into that paint. And then also a little bit of water really does help. Makes it very, very tiny like that. And I'm going to take this taper up to the top here on this one. Get that little loop happening. I'm going to go ahead and fill in this little loop up here too with that darker shade. Add a little bit more water here. Kind of squeegeed out a little bit because you don't want to have a big water run on your canvas either, even like a puddle of it. You don't want the puddle. I'm going to go back into that. Lighter gray. Kind of helps softly taper that all in. Right. And now little loops again. Starting to really look like paisley. It's looking good. All right, now we're going to make it belong. So we want to do that nice soft fade of a line in there. Add a little bit more water. Make sure and twist it out here. Do a little bit in the inside and then the outside. All right, that's looking like beautiful paisley. Okay, so now we have a few little dots we need to do in here. So I'm going to use a little trick that I do with the end of the handle. So I basically use the end of the handle like that. And we're going to go right into the black paint. You can see how it's just right there on the end. And then you can just press firmly, just go all the way down just like that. And it makes this really nice, perfect little black dot every single time. So that makes for a very fun little pattern. I started here, I think I just did one, but you can certainly add a few more. So basically all this is, it kind of looks like a little flower. So I'm going to do another one over here. And that's really easy to add in. Let's do one more over here. Okay, let's see. Getting really, really close. I might even be what I would call almost done here. I want to add just a few more little hints of color. I'm going to just push in a little bit more of this blue. That's that slate blue that we mixed up. I'm liking that, just kind of coming through and more of a vertical pattern there. Same thing here. This is looking a little bright, so I'm going to go ahead and distress this just a little bit. So this is my little buddy brush, and I'm just kind of barely dabbing into this. It's a dry brush, and so I'm getting a little bit of that color on there, but I'm also getting a little bit of the dry brush effect. There, now it looks a little bit more older, weathered. I'm going to do a little bit more of a hint of this over here too. And I'm going to reconnect this little, make sure it's really thin though. Let's grab a different brush that's not so abused. I really abused that one earlier with the bounce effect. So we're getting a nice, clean, thin line, but I want a darker charcoal here. So there's my little bit, but it's very thin. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of drag this across here. Okay. All right. So I think we're getting super close to being done. I'm adding a few more of those little dark lines. Just a little bit of a shadow because it's almost like a dry brush. It's just a touch of that black on there. So I'm being real subtle with that. Now I did a little horizontal pull to add a little bit of that weathering going the other way. And so I've got, again, this is a dry brush, just a super tiny amount of black, and I'm just almost kind of doing a little rub here with it. So it's almost creating like a way to kind of softly blend in a little bit of that black shadow on the side. Gather a little bit more of that create a little bit more of like a shadow. Okay. All right, and now we're down to, I think maybe even just lettering. Got a few little water spots there. It's kind of charming, maybe. Okay, so here's some options. Beginners, you can absolutely do this with your permanent marker. That's what comes with the kit. And I'm going to give you a little visual on this, but here's the trick. This is really important. You need to make sure that your paint is all completely dry, because if your permanent marker hits wet paint, it will just kill the permanent marker. You'll have to just throw it in the trash. But this is all dry, and so I'm going to give you a visual on what this looks like here. So you can use this to come right over the top. Because see, this is all that work that we did in the very beginning. And then don't worry, I'm also going to show you how to paint this on too, but this just definitely gives you the idea. People who maybe have a little bit of a shaky hand, they prefer this method. Now, another little trick is you want to make sure that you go around the loop of the letter, because if you come around the inside, you'll completely close off your loop. And you go, oops, and then it won't even look like that letter anymore. So you do have to be really careful with that. And these are really tiny little areas in here. So you do have to be very precise, and that's why I say the permanent marker is a good option if you're very concerned about how you might do with the painting. So we'll continue to get the basic sketch in. And then I'm going to do some paint work. I'm just doing a real quick, not filling it all in, but just basically doing the basic sketch. All right, now for painting, you want to come back in with your little bit brush, back to that black. A little bit of water also helps, but definitely get it mixed in your plate. So you don't want it to be too watery and then end up getting a big puddle of water. So we've got a pretty nice consistency here. And I work into it a little bit. I also kind of squeegee a little bit out. So I've got my brush full of it, but I squeegee a little bit out, twist it into a nice fine point, and then I can go ahead and work right over the surface here. And then I would encourage you to wait for all of your painted surface area to completely dry. I'm going to try to just be real careful and not touch down into it again. But you don't want to just put your hand right down into it. That would be a little bit sad. And I'm going to try to not do that as well. So far, I have not. So good job, me. So I'm just following this along here. And now we're getting next to a loop. So I have to be careful that I go around it. The thickness of the brush goes around it and not inside of it. Same thing with this letter E. And the little S has a little one too, but honestly, that's one that you could even kind of pretty much close off, at least at the top. That's not a real significant one, but the one here at the bottom becomes a bit more significant. So you want to definitely go around that too. Be very delicate. Again, this is a traditional, like just like you'd hold a pencil. It's a pencil hold. So and then a little bit more pressure with your hand as you apply force there, that will make the stroke a little bit more fat. And then a really light hand will keep it very thin. So you want to be careful at first, and again, keep your pressure really light. And then you can add a little bit more pressure as you want to make a bigger stroke. And we've got another loop, so we want to be careful to go around the outside. So we've got a little bit of pressure in there to give it some width. And I need a little bit more water. Getting a little dry over here. So a little twist. Again, that's that little rotation between your fingertips. Helps get it rotated back out to a fine point. Lots of loops on this one. So again, just make sure you go right around the outside edge. Be very delicate when you apply pressure. Just barely touch the canvas. Yay. All right. Just like looking at a few things and thinking, a little bit more black. Sometimes the more I look at it, the more I find little things that I want done. So just adding a few more of these little shadows into the silo here. I've got my little bit brush, just a little bit of water, and I'm going to go ahead and just soften that up a little bit. Almost gives a look of watercolors. I'm going to go back into a little bit more of that charcoal gray and that slate. Just do one more touch here. All right, so I think we are done. It's very exciting. And of course, you can sign your masterpiece whenever you're done. We usually do that right here in the bottom corner. But I think we are all set. We have just finished Bless Me Indeed. So we have done a great job. So I'm super excited. And this is our very first class with the split screen here. So it looks really good from where I'm at. I'm going to do a little test and watch it, see how it went. But thank you again so very, very much for joining me. Really appreciate y'all being here. And this painting kit is online with all the supplies that you need. We make it as easy as possible for y'all so you can find everything that you need at tipsyartist.com. And this is a beautiful painting to start the new year with, because going into 2021, we're going to take a deep breath and we're going to say, bless me indeed. It's going to be awesome. All right. So again, thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.